Dad, we're leaving Oregon tomorrow. I've sold the beach house. Don't worry, I'll send you your share. That sentence cut through the phone cold, sharp, and clean, like a blade slicing straight through my memory. I froze right there in the garage, oil still on my hands, the old radio in the corner humming a half-finished country tune. Sold. The beach house. The house Rachel and I built from every paycheck I earned fixing school buses. The house where she planted her first lavender bush. The place where we spent every summer watching our boy grow. And now he called announcing it like he'd just traded in an old truck. Before I could speak, another voice came on the line. Brooke, his wife. Her tone was sweet, but polished, the kind of sweetness that left a chill behind. He did the right thing, Dad, she said softly. That house was falling apart. I got a good price for it. You don't need to worry. I heard a faint laugh, and then the line went dead. No goodbye, no pause, just silence. The garage grew still. The smell of burnt oil mixed with cold metal. Heavy, suffocating. I turned toward the old photo of Rachel hanging by the window, her gentle smile frozen in sunlight, her arms around a boy who once thought his father could fix anything. And I whispered, "Do you hear that, Rachel? He just sold the house you swore we'd keep till the end." That morning, Tillamook still slept. The sea fog lingered on the truck windows, dripping slow as the wind passed through. I was lying beneath an old school bus, back pressed against the concrete wrench in hand, listening to the rhythm of steel, the only language I've ever truly understood. I've done this for 40 years. This garage, I've lived here longer than I've lived in my own home. Every bolt, every stain of grease, they've been more faithful to me than most people ever were. Everything else was just noise after Rachel was gone. I still remember the day we buried her. Cold rain. Gray skies. People left flowers, said words I don't remember. When everyone was gone, I stood alone by the ocean. Rachel had told me once, "If I'm ever gone, don't let anyone touch the beach house. It's the last piece of our family," I promised her. And to this day, that's the only promise I've never broken. So when the phone rang, I thought it was one of the drivers calling about a busted brake line. But when I saw the name on the screen, Tyler Merrick, I paused. He rarely called. And when he did, it was always short, sharp, like a man giving orders in a room he didn't want to stay in. I wiped my hands on an old rag and answered. His voice came fast, clipped, with no hesitation. "Dad, we're leaving Oregon tomorrow. I've sold the beach house. Don't worry, I'll send your share." For a second, I said nothing. Just listened to my heartbeat pounding in my chest like a hammer striking metal. Finally, I asked, keeping my tone steady. "What did you just say?" "The house at Tillamook Bay," he replied. "You never use it, Dad. It's just sitting there, rotting away. I got a great offer. We need the money for the Austin project." Then came the line that hit harder than any punch I've ever taken. "You should start packing." "Packing," I repeated. "Yeah," he said. "The buyers want the keys in 2 weeks. I'll send your part soon. Gotta run, big meeting." Click. Silence. The kind that doesn't echo, it just sinks. The radio crackled in the background, a faint country song about home and heartbreak. The air smelled of oil and burnt rubber. I looked down at my hands, calloused, scarred, stained black from years of labor. Hands that never shook. Not in war. Not in grief. But that morning, they trembled. Not from fear. From realization. My own son had just sold the only thing left that still tied me to his mother. I walked to the steel cabinet in the corner. The door squealed as I pulled it open. Stacks of invoices, service logs, spare parts, manuals. The bottom drawer was locked. I reached for the small key I kept in my wallet, turned it slowly, click. Inside was an old metal box, its label faded but still legible. Merrick Maintenance, LLC, Living Trust. I placed it on the table, brushed the dust away, and lifted the lid. The papers were still there. Rachel's and my signatures side by side. Ink faded but strong. We'd created it to protect Tyler, never knowing that one day it would protect me from him. The house wasn't in my name. It belonged to Merrick Maintenance, LLC, a company I'd formed with my old Army buddy, Mark Johnson, and the trust. Rachel's idea stated in clear legal ink, no property under this trust may be transferred while Dale Merrick is still living. Meaning no matter what Tyler signed, no matter what deal he made, none of it was real. I sat down holding that paper, reading every word, letting the truth sink in. Sunlight poured through the dusty window, catching the edge of an old nameplate that read D. Merrick, bus mechanic. I looked at it, then at my hands. I've fixed hundreds of engines, tightened thousands of bolts, but nothing hurts quite like trying to fix your own son. I lifted my gaze to Rachel's photo again. Her eyes seemed to follow me, steady, patient, forgiving. I smiled faintly, a smile even I didn't recognize. Tyler, I murmured, voice, cold, steady. You just sold a house that was never yours. I stepped outside. The morning light spilled over the bay, waves crashing slow and steady like the ticking of a clock. Salt hit my tongue, sharp and familiar. The wind rose, lifting a few loose papers off the table behind me, but I didn't turn back. I knew what I was going to do. Not to reclaim a house, but to reclaim the dignity my own blood had tried to sell. The ocean roared louder. I stared straight at it, and spoke not to anyone in particular, but to the ghost of a promise I'd once made. My son thinks he just sold my greatest possession. But I know he's just touched the last piece of his mother I still had left. I climbed into my old pickup, the seat creaking beneath me, the engine coughing to life. Rachel's small photograph slid from the dashboard onto the floor. I picked it up, placed it back carefully. The tires crunched over gravel as I drove toward the bay. And there it was, the beach house, standing quiet against the gray morning sky. I stopped at the gate, didn't go in, just looked. That place had heard more laughter and more silence than any church could hold. Rachel, I whispered, it's time. I'll keep my promise to you, just not the way you imagined. The wind howled across the coast. The sea answered back. And I knew from that moment on the reckoning had begun. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with anger. It arrives with silence and the patience of a man who refuses to be erased. People say the quiet years in life aren't always the happy ones. Sometimes they're just the silence between two storms. For me, that silence began in 2010, the year Rachel left this world. I can still smell the hospital that day, disinfectant stale coffee, and the fading breath of the only woman who ever made me want to come home. Rachel lay in bed, pale and still, yet her eyes were clear, bright even. I held her hand, the same hand that once held chalk, and wrote hope on a classroom board. Now it was thin, trembling, almost weightless. Her voice came soft, spaced between the beeps of the heart monitor. Promise me something, Dale. If Tyler ever forgets where he came from, don't use anger to teach him. Use your life instead. I didn't understand what she meant, but her eyes weren't afraid, they were trusting. And I nodded, a simple nod. But later I realized that nod was a signature on a contract with fate itself. The funeral was small. Cold morning. Fog heavy across the churchyard. No choir, no expensive flowers, just a few neighbors. Some of Rachel's colleagues and her students, tiny hands holding white daisies. Tyler stood behind the casket. He didn't cry. 23, fresh out of college, black suit, loose tie. His face blank, distant. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Your mom would be proud of you," I said quietly. He nodded. Didn't look at me. Just whispered, "I know." When everyone left, I stayed. Didn't pray. Didn't say goodbye. Just looked at the stone, Rachel Merrick, 1968-2010, and spoke sadly as promised. Life after that moved slow, the kind of slow that only people left behind can understand. Daytime in the garage, nights in an empty house. Dinner was usually a cold sandwich and a cheap beer. But simplicity has its own mercy. Sometimes I talked to Rachel through her pictures on the wall. Sometimes the crashing waves outside Tillamook Bay answered back. Tyler left for Portland after the funeral. He said he needed to start over. I understood. Ambition isn't a sin. Forgetting what you're running from, that's where it starts. At first he called every week, then every 2, then once a month, then just short texts. "Busy dad. Take care." One night in 2011, while I was changing the oil on an old bus, Mark Johnson dropped by. Mark was my brother-in-arms from Vietnam, the only man still alive from our unit after Da Nang, 1972. Now he worked as a lawyer in town handling estates and small business assets. We sat in the garage under the yellow light, coffee cooling between us. Mark looked around and said, "You still got that beach house, Dale?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's Rachel's." He paused, then leaned in. "You should set up a trust and an LLC, not to dodge taxes, to protect what matters." I scoffed. "Protect what I don't have much left to lose." Mark smiled sadly. "You've got one thing people would trade their lives for: coastal land." That night we stayed up late. Mark drew up the first draft right there on my workbench. The name we chose, Merrick Maintenance LLC. It sounded like a repair shop, and it was on paper. But in truth, it was the legal shell holding everything I owned: the beach house, the land, and what little savings Rachel and I had left. According to the papers, I was the sole managing member. Tyler was listed as beneficiary, the one who'd inherit everything after I died. A quiet safeguard, simple but ironclad. I remember Mark saying, "If your boy ever marries someone who doesn't share your values, these papers might save you more than you think." I laughed. I couldn't imagine that day coming. 2015. 5 years after Rachel passed. Tyler came home for Thanksgiving. First time in nearly 2 years. He walked in looking like success itself, white shirt, shiny watch, phone buzzing every 2 minutes. He shook Mark's hand. "So your dad's lawyer?" he said, curt. Mark nodded. "Yeah. And I need your signature today." We sat around the kitchen table, the same one where Rachel used to teach him how to bake. Mark spread out the documents. He explained slowly, in that lawyer tone of his, "Your family's assets are being held under Merrick Maintenance LLC in a living trust. That means everything still belongs to your father, but when he passes, you'll inherit legally. However, while he's alive, no one can sell or mortgage any of those properties." Tyler nodded halfway through. Didn't ask questions, just signed. Then he stood up. "Whatever Dad wants. I've got a meeting with friends." He left the scent of cologne and the slam of a car door trailing behind. Mark watched him go, then turned to me. "You sure about this, Dale? He's young. You should explain what these papers really mean." I shook my head. "No need. He's my son." He'd never turn his back on his mother's house. I believed that. Like a fool. After that night, life went back to its quiet rhythm. I worked my shifts at the district garage, took small repair jobs to fill the evenings. The beach house stayed the same, silent, steady, a reminder that Rachel once existed. Every summer, I drove out there, painted the fence, planted new lavender where hers had died. Sometimes Tyler sent photos, him and Brooke, brown hair, bright smile, the kind of woman who made everyone believe she cared. I looked at those photos and thought, as long as he's happy. I didn't know it then, but that's when my son began to forget where he came from. Looking back now, I see those years for what they really were, not peace, but the calm veneer of a wall already cracking beneath the paint. I thought I was living in memory, but I was just sleeping between storms. Now I sit in this same garage, staring at the faded folder, the very one I once believed would protect my son. Now I know it's not a shield anymore. It's the only blade I still hold. Some lessons are written in ink, others in blood and silence. That afternoon, Tillamook felt like it was holding its breath. A thin fog lay over the town. The smell of salt slipped through every crack in the old houses. I sat in my kitchen staring at the trust papers spread across the table. My coffee had gone cold. The light from the window carried that dull copper glow of autumn, the kind of light that reminds you some things will never come back. I wasn't angry. I didn't cry. I just felt a hollow space, long, cold, and quiet, as the coastal road at night. Maybe that's what it feels like when everything you built with your own hands can be undone by your own blood with a single phone call. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Familiar. I knew who it was. Eleanor Reeves, 65, lived 2 houses down. Rachel's best friend. A retired teacher, small frame, silver hair cut short, always smelled like cinnamon and baked apples. She was the kind of memory that refused to fade. She smiled gently, holding a warm apple pie still steaming in its dish. I heard from the church ladies. Tyler's moving to Austin. I didn't look up. Not just moving, I said. He said he sold the beach house. The plate in her hand trembled. She set the pie on the table, stared at the papers, and asked softly, "Have you told him about the old documents yet?" I shook my head. He never asked. I never forced it. Eleanor looked at me, her gray-blue eyes catching the faint light from the window. "Rachel once told me," she said, "that you always thought silence was the safest form of love." She paused, then added quietly, "But sometimes, Dale, that silence makes people believe they can do whatever they want." I didn't answer, just stood, poured another cup of coffee, the bitterness filling the air between us. Eleanor looked around the kitchen. Same old walls, same photos of Rachel hanging everywhere. She touched a frame from 1985, Rachel and I, younger, smiling in front of the house. "You kept your promise to her," she said. "It's just that Tyler doesn't know you've been protecting him from himself all these years." I turned to her voice, rough but calm. "I don't want him destroyed, Eleanor, but he needs to understand what loss feels like." She nodded, laid a hand on my shoulder. "Then don't act out of anger, Dale. Let justice do the heavy lifting." The phone buzzed on the table, cutting through the silence. "Mark Johnson." I picked up. Mark's voice was deep, steady, the kind of voice that never rushed. Dale, we've got a problem, he said. The bank just flagged a transaction under Merrick Maintenance, LLC. Someone tried to move funds using a power of attorney linked to your beach property. I didn't speak for a moment. Mark understood the silence. He continued. The signature doesn't match the one on file. Looks like someone tried to push a sale through a broker. The bank's frozen the transaction until they hear from me or from you. Thank you, Mark, I said. I'll come by your office tomorrow morning. You all right? I took a breath. I've been through war, I said. This doesn't even make the list. I hung up, set the phone down. The overhead light flickered its reflection, rippling across the dark surface of my coffee black as burnt oil. Eleanor was still standing there, her hand resting on the table's edge. What are you going to do? She asked. I didn't look at her. I opened a drawer, pulled out an old photo Rachel standing on the porch of the beach house, her hair caught in the wind, smiling like she still believed life would stay gentle. Nothing, I said, finally. I'll let things play out. He'll learn what it costs. Eleanor stayed quiet. Then she said something I'll never forget. You don't need to seek revenge, Dale. But don't let injustice stand, not because you were silent. I looked out the window. The sun was dying over the bay, the horizon swallowed by fog. Gulls skimmed the surface of the water, their cries hoarse, distant. When Eleanor left, she turned at the gate. I was standing in the doorway, a half-burned cigarette in my hand. The smoke drifted across my face like old memories refusing to fade. Rachel always believed, she said, that you'd never let the worst happen to your son. But sometimes, to save someone, you have to let them fall. I didn't answer, just watched her silhouette disappear into the mist. When the house fell silent again, I went into the small study, pulled the folder from the drawer, Merrick Maintenance, LLC. Each page turned with a dry sound, like footsteps across wet sand. I stopped at the one with Tyler's signature young handwriting, rushed ink smudged at the edge. He'd signed his own trap without ever knowing it. Not because I'd planned it, but because he never cared enough to read what his father had built for him. I laid the paper flat under the lamp, its yellow light spreading like rust across the desk. And in my head, the pieces started to click like tools falling into their rightful place. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was about a lesson, one he'd have to pay for himself. I stepped out onto the porch. Night had settled in. The wind carried salt and the first bite of cold. Far off, the light from the beach house still glowed faintly. The house he thought he'd sold, the house I knew, still bore my name. I whispered, as if Rachel were standing beside me. Once you said, if Tyler ever forgets where he started, don't hate him. But maybe, to make him remember, I'll have to do something he'll never forget. The wind surged, sending the papers on the table fluttering across the room. I crushed the cigarette, locked the door, and turned off the lights. On the desk, the last page of the trust caught the glow of the lamp, its bold line reading, "Beneficiary rights effective only upon death of managing member." I smiled a tired, knowing smile. "My son," I murmured, "your father is still alive. And as long as I am, you won't sell a damn thing that belongs to this family." Outside, the ocean pounded against the shore like the distant roll of war drums. And somewhere deep inside, a plan began to take shape. Revenge is easy. Justice takes patience, and silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. The next morning, Tillamook's sky looked like used motor oil, gray, heavy, tired. Fog still clung to the truck windows, spreading thin across the narrow roads leading down to the bay. I left home early, driving my old 1985 Ford pickup toward town. The engine rumbled low and steady like the heartbeat of a man who's lived long enough to know every storm starts with silence. The bank sat on the corner of Main Street, a glass building gleaming cold under the neon lights. I parked in front, stepped inside. The air smelled of perfume and fresh coffee, a world that didn't belong to me. No grease, no steel, just the soft hum of money moving quietly between hands. They say wealth has no scent. I've been poor long enough to know it does. It smells too clean to be real. A woman walked out from behind the counter, blonde hair tied back, crisp navy suit heels, tapping softly on the tile floor. Her name tag read Clara Thompson, Senior Loan Officer. Mid-40s, calm face, eyes sharp, the kind of person who can read you by the way you stand. She smiled politely. "Mr. Merrick, I'm Clara. The bank received a verification request regarding a property under Merrick Maintenance, LLC. Please follow me." The office was small white walls, glass table, the hum of an air vent. I sat down, laid my hat on the table. My hands, cracked, oil-stained, looked out of place against the polished glass surface. Clara opened her laptop, clicked through a few files, then placed a printed folder in front of me. "This," she said, "is a copy of the sale agreement for the Tillamook Bay Beach House. It was submitted via email from Portland by a Mr. Tyler Merrick, with an attached power of attorney bearing your signature." I looked down. The first page showed the contract official stamp realtor's seal purchase price, all correct. Only one thing wasn't. The signature. Dale Merrick written neatly in black ink. But not mine. The M tilted wrong, the loop of the K stretched too high. I'd never written like that in my life. Clara turned to the next page. "The authorization form," she said. "Our verification system flagged it as inconsistent. Date signed March 5th, 2024. However, our last in-person record for you is from August 2022. Doesn't match. And the stroke pattern differs from the original sample on file." I studied the page quietly. Finally said Tyler, or someone working with him, used an old scanned copy of my signature. Thought pasting it here would be enough. Clara stayed silent, watching me the way people watch someone standing too close to the edge of a cliff. I asked, "How far did the transaction go?" "Not completed," she replied. "The bank froze it pending your confirmation. The property is listed under Merrick Maintenance, LLC, and according to records, you're the only managing member authorized to sign." I nodded. Outside, wind rattled the glass, a sound like distant waves hitting stone. I remembered Rachel's voice from the hospital bed. "If Tyler ever forgets where he came from, don't use anger to teach him." Back then, I thought she meant kindness. Now I understand some lessons don't need yelling. They need consequences. Clara slid the papers toward me. "What would you like me to do?" "Mr. Merrick?" I looked her in the eye. "Print me full copies. Add a note that attorney Mark Johnson must be contacted before any release of funds. And Clara," I paused, "keep this confidential." She nodded, not asking why. She'd probably seen this before, family secrets dressed up in paperwork. The printer started humming. Sheets of paper slid out in rhythm, each one a record of betrayal neatly formatted in legal type. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table. People say age brings peace. Maybe it just teaches you how to hold still while bleeding inside. Clara handed me the folder sealed in a thick envelope. "If you want," she said quietly, "the bank can forward this to the police." I gave a faint smile. No, I don't want my son learning that lesson in prison. Something flickered in her eyes, a mix of surprise and respect. She nodded once. Understood. I left the room. Sunlight hit the lobby glass, splintering into bright reflections across the marble floor. People laughed, pens clicked, contracts changed hands, a whole world moving around money while mine was frozen in time. Outside, I opened the envelope, looked again at the forged signature. A single pen stroke enough to ruin a life. If it weren't for the trust, one more day, and the house would have been gone. Not because the law failed, but because trust did. I stood on the steps, the ocean wind cutting through my jacket. Down the road, logging trucks passed by, the smell of pine and gasoline sharp in the air. I spoke not loud, just steady, a voiceover meant for no one but myself. My son didn't just try to sell my house, he nearly committed fraud. But I won't let him learn that behind bars. He'll learn it in life where the law can't always reach but consequences never forget. I pulled out my phone, dialed Mark Johnson. He answered on the first ring. Dale. Yeah, I just left the bank. They found a forged document, my signature. I need to meet this afternoon, before this goes too far. Mark's voice dropped. 3 o'clock, my office. And Dale? You holding together? I looked toward the bay. The waves were rolling silver under the pale sun. I've been calm my whole life, I said. But calm's not the same as still. It's time to move. I climbed into the truck, set the envelope on the passenger seat. In the rearview mirror, I caught my own reflection. A 68-year-old man who'd seen too much to flinch, but for the first time knew exactly what he had to do. The engine started slow rattling against the silence. Outside, lavender was beginning to bloom along the fence line Rachel planted years ago. I lit a cigarette. Smoke curled out the window, vanishing into the salt wind. My voice quiet, even cut through the hum of the road. People only learn the value of honesty when they're standing at the edge of losing it. Tyler, you chose your road. Now you'll have to walk it. Justice doesn't need rage. Sometimes it just needs patience, and a man who refuses to stay silent. There are things I didn't see with my own eyes, but war taught me how to listen, how to take scattered pieces and fit them together. I wasn't in Austin that day, but I know exactly what happened. Every look, every word, every moment my son began to realize that his greed was no longer a secret. Austin, Texas. Monday morning. The sky was high and dry sunlight bouncing off glass towers so bright it hurt to look at. Tyler and Brooke landed at 9. He carried a laptop, a few tailored suits, and a business plan he swore would change their lives forever. Brooke was different designer dress, the newest phone, and the gaze of a woman used to fine dining, not dinners cooked in an old seaside kitchen. I imagined Tyler walking into that downtown office tower, the glass doors sliding open, a blast of cold air against his face. 17th floor, conference room. The air smelled of steel perfume and money. 3 investors sat at the table, an older white man with silver hair, a sharp-eyed Indian woman, and an Asian American man with round glasses. Tyler started his presentation strong, talking about AI data platforms, seed funding, market disruption. His tone confident, rehearsed. Brooke sat beside him, nodding on cue, adding quick financial notes. They looked like the perfect couple, young, ambitious, and sure of themselves. Until the questions began. The older investor looked up, voice calm but cold. Mr. Merrick, in your financial disclosures, we noticed most of your equity comes from the sale of a property in Oregon. Correct? Tyler smiled. That's right. Our family's beach house. The sale's already finalized. The Indian woman leaned forward, placing a printed email on the table. That's strange, she said, because according to this, the transaction's been frozen due to legal complications involving ownership of Merrick Maintenance, LLC. The room went silent. I can almost see Tyler's face in that moment, the half-smile freezing mid-air, his eyes darting toward Brooke, his throat tightening. The words stuck somewhere between disbelief and panic. He forced a calm tone. There must be some mistake. I'll clear it up. But the man with silver hair just stared at him, the kind of stare that comes from years of watching young men burn their futures on arrogance. After the meeting, Tyler stepped out onto the balcony, lit a cigarette, the smoke rising like the plans that had just gone up in flames. Brooke stood inside, scrolling her phone, silent. He turned to her. Did you know anything about that email? She shrugged. No, probably just a delay from the bank. He stared at her harder this time. I'll ask again. Did you move the deposit money somewhere else? Her lips tightened. She didn't meet his eyes. Then slowly she said, I transferred it temporarily, for tax efficiency. A friend of mine here in Austin has a real estate project, and I thought Tyler cut her off. A friend who? What project? The air in the room turned heavy. Brooke dropped her phone on the table, her voice sharp and cold. Don't start talking to me like your poor old father in that dusty garage. I didn't marry you to live like him. That sentence, that was the second bullet. If the first one hit trust, this one shattered pride. Tyler didn't speak, didn't shout. Just stood there a moment, then turned and walked out. The hallway stretched long and sterile, his reflection bending across the glass wall, tall, distorted, alone. I can almost hear the echo of his footsteps through the hotel lobby, the elevator doors sliding open, then closing again like the final seal on a chapter he never meant to write. Downstairs, he checked his phone, opened his banking app. Show $1,000. A red notice blinked across the screen. Account temporarily frozen pending verification of property ownership. I imagine his hands shaking the way soldiers used to shake when they realized the ground beneath them had vanished. Everything he thought he controlled, money, business, marriage, dignity, gone in a blink. Brooke was upstairs, probably making another phone call. And Tyler, my son, stood in a 5-star lobby, with nothing left but silence. No one needed to teach him a lesson, I said to myself later. The law and his own greed already started doing that for me. What I didn't do life is doing cold fare and slow. Tyler sat down on a lobby chair, gold light from the ceiling spilling over his pale face. He dialed the bank. A recorded voice replied, "We're sorry, your account is under legal review. Please contact your original branch in Oregon for assistance." A hotel staff member approached politely. "Mr. Merrick, would you like me to call a taxi?" He shook his head. Didn't know where to go. Didn't know where to start. Maybe Brooke was already texting that old friend. Maybe she was gone for good. And in Tillamook, I was sitting in my garage, listening to the morning radio talk about the economy, as if the world kept turning, while my son's life was quietly collapsing. I picture him looking up at the ceiling of that hotel lobby, his eyes empty, as if he finally understood. Everything he thought he'd earned was built on a lie. A lie he started himself, the moment he believed money could be traded for integrity. I don't have to raise a hand to punish my son, I said softly to the waves that night. The world's doing that for me, and every blow lands sharp cold like the steel I've spent my life shaping. When night fell over Austin, the towers still glowed with light. Brooke left the hotel in someone else's car. Didn't look back. Tyler stayed in the dark alone with the hum of the air conditioner and the sound of his own heartbeat. Thousands of miles away, I turned off the lights in my garage, stepped out onto the porch, and looked toward the Black Sea. The wind was sharp. The salt stung my eyes. Rachel once said, "Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from the choices people make." Now I finally believed her. Some storms don't roar. They whisper and take everything when you least expect it. The next afternoon, the sky above Tillamook hung heavy and gray like an old sheet of metal left too long in the salt wind. Seagulls circled low over the harbor, their cries blending with the slow groan of boats shifting against their ropes. I drove the old Ford pickup toward town. Its engine coughed twice before catching, and I couldn't help thinking it sounded like me still running, just taking longer to start these days. Mark Johnson's law office sat near the docks, a red brick building older than either of us. The wooden sign above the door read, "Johnson and Keller, Attorneys at Law." The letters faded, eaten by sea air and years. Every time the wind pushed through the harbor, that front door creaked a long, tired sound that felt almost human. Inside, it smelled the same as always. Paper dust, coffee gone cold, the scent of choices that can't be undone. Mark stood behind his desk when I walked in. Rolled sleeves, silver hair, the straight posture of a man who'd once taken orders and now gave them quietly. We shook hands. We didn't need words. Men like us had run out of small talk decades ago. He nodded toward the chair. "You brought the papers." I placed the envelope on the desk, the seal still damp from the fog outside. He opened it and began to read, eyes moving with the calm precision of someone who's learned to find truth between lines of print. After a while, he exhaled. Just as I thought he said, "Because of the living trust and the LLC, your son has no authority to sell that property while you're alive. That entire transaction is void." I didn't move, didn't celebrate. It was one thing to be right. It's another to realize why you had to be. Mark pulled out 2 pages, one with my real signature, one forged. He set them side by side. Even from across the desk, the difference was plain mine. Steady, unbroken, confident. His nervous, artificial a hand trying to fake conviction. Mark's voice dropped lower. "Dale, if you wanted to take this all the way, you could sue for fraud. Civil, maybe even criminal. The moment a forged signature crosses state lines, that's federal." I drummed my fingers on the desk. Slow, deliberate. The sound matched the ticking of the wall clock behind him. 1 second for every year I'd spent trying to believe my son wouldn't turn into a stranger. Finally, I said, "No, Mark. We're not going to court." He looked up sharply. "Are you sure I know what he almost did," I cut in. "But I'm not interested in revenge dressed as justice. I just want him to understand what he's already done." Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Most fathers I know would want blood. Most fathers haven't buried what I've buried," I said quietly. The room fell still. Outside, the wind pressed against the window. The glass trembled. Mark finally nodded. "I'll draft the letter. We'll issue a formal notice declaring the sale void. The property remains under Merrick Maintenance, LLC, and under your management." He paused. "No cops, no headlines." "Add one more line," I said. "All beneficiary rights remain valid, but will be suspended until confirmed in writing by Dale Merrick." He smiled, that small, knowing smile men share when they recognize the shape of justice. "You're teaching him something the courts never could." I met his eyes. "It's not a lesson. It's the truth. And the truth has a way of outliving every argument." That evening, the sky turned the color of lead. I drove back along the coast road, headlights cutting through mist. When I reached the house, the ocean was calm. Too calm the way it gets before the tide turns. Inside, the air smelled of salt and wood polish. The walls hummed faintly from the wind outside. I walked through each room. Rachel's touch, still everywhere. The lace curtains, the framed photos of Tyler at 6, grinning with missing teeth. In the bedroom, I opened the old closet. Behind her winter coat, the one she wore the year she got sick, sat the gray safe, its hinges spotted with rust. I took out the key, turned it twice. The click sounded small, but in that silence it might as well have been a gunshot. Inside were the remnants of an entire life. Our business papers, Rachel's photos, my service medal, and one envelope yellowed, sealed the edges, worn soft from years of waiting. Her handwriting danced across the front. For you and Tyler when he needs to hear the truth. I'd seen it before. Hundreds of times. Always closed. Always waiting. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. A faint lavender scent rose from the paper. Rachel. Always Rachel. I began to read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. My dearest, if I am gone, I know you'll keep everything the house Tyler and the quiet kind of faith we built together. But remember, our son is not you. He belongs to a world that moves faster, hungrier, easier to forget. One day, he may trade what's ours for what glitters. When that happens, don't use your soldier's anger to destroy him. Use your life to mirror his. Let him see what endurance looks like, because sometimes losing quietly is how love wins. My eyes burned. I wasn't sure if it was the salt air or something breaking open inside me. The waves hit the rocks outside steady like a heartbeat you could measure grief by. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it back into the envelope, then into the safe. When the door clicked shut, it felt final, not an ending, but a point of return. I stood by the window. Moonlight cut a pale road across the water leading out into nothingness. Rachel, I whispered, you were right. I thought the war taught me how to survive. But you taught me how to keep living. And now it's my turn to teach our son what no classroom ever could, the price of trust. I locked the safe again, the key cold in my palm. Downstairs, the clock struck 9. The sound rolled through the house, echoing off the walls like a distant drumbeat. I picked up the phone and called Mark. He answered on the second ring. Dale Draft, the letter, I said. But remember, we're not here to kill his future. We're here to make him see the present. Mark paused. Then understood. When I hung up, the wind picked up again. The curtains moved like ghosts of old conversations. The lamp flickered, casting shadows over a framed photo on the wall. Rachel and Tyler standing in the lavender field sunlight in their hair. I sat back down, picked up my service medal from the nightstand. Cold metal. Heavy. Honest. It reminded me of why I'd fought then, and what I was fighting for now. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just the quiet hope that someday my son would look at this same ocean and understand everything I never said. The dead don't speak to us with words. They speak with the choices they leave behind. And sometimes the hardest promise to keep is the one that asks you to forgive. In small coastal towns like Tillamook, no secret survives more than 3 days. News travels faster than the tide, and the tide never stops moving. 3 days after I met with Mark, the whispers began to crawl through the streets. Some said the bank was taking my house. Some said my son had stolen everything and run. Others claimed I'd gone senile and accidentally signed away my own home. I didn't bother correcting anyone. The ocean doesn't ask questions, and it doesn't take sides. Every morning I still went to the garage, changed the oil in the school buses, ate my cold sandwich and black coffee at noon. But the way people looked at me had changed. Not curiosity, sympathy mixed with a quiet kind of respect. That's the strange thing about small towns. Once you've been broken publicly, people stop pretending they're better than you. Around midday, I stopped for gas near the harbor. The old man who ran the station, about my age, handed me a folded copy of the Tillamook Chronicle. His voice dropped low. "Dale, you might want to see this. I don't know who talked, but it's out there." On page 3, a small column, "Local veteran may lose home over family paperwork error. Sources report the dispute involves a seaside property currently under bank review. No criminal charges have been filed. No names. No details. But in a town like ours, you only need the words veteran with a beach house, and everyone knows who they're talking about." I set the paper down and smiled faintly. Rachel once told me real honor isn't in what people write about you, but in how you face it. She was right, as always. That afternoon, Eleanor Reeves came by with her usual basket of warm bread. She's 65, retired schoolteacher, Rachel's closest friend. She set the basket down and pulled a newspaper from her cardigan. "You saw it, I did. Are you angry?" I looked out the window, the sea rolling in slow, heavy waves. "No," I said. "What's the point? People just repeat what they hear. I know what I keep." She pulled out a chair across from me, her eyes sharp beneath the yellow kitchen light. "So, what are you going to do next?" I took a long breath. The lawyer will send him the notice. He needs to hear it from someone other than me. After that, if he wants to face me, he knows where I'll be. Eleanor nodded, hands folded over the table. Her voice softened. "Just remember, Dale, anger teaches nothing. Let the law do the heavy lifting." Mark did exactly as promised. 3 days later, he mailed an official legal notice to Tyler. The copy he sent me was clean, firm, every word, precise, every line, deliberate. Notice of invalid transaction. The property located at 421 Seaview Drive, Tillamook Bay, Oregon, remains under the legal ownership of Merrick Maintenance, LLC. Sole authorized representative Dale Merrick. Any attempt to transfer or mortgage said property without Mr. Merrick's written consent is null and void. All funds related to the transaction will remain frozen until verification is complete. Continued action following this notice may result in civil proceedings. Mark included a short, handwritten note at the end: "Do nothing more. The law's already on your side." Later that afternoon, I stopped by the small cafe near the docks. A few familiar faces looked up from their tables. Some smiled, some avoided eye contact. A few nodded the way people do when they don't know what to say but want to say something. I nodded back. No shame, no fear. Just the quiet weight of a man who's realized that sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from enemies. It started to rain on my drive home, a soft, steady drizzle. Drops pattered against the old pickup roof as the radio hummed a country classic, "Take Me Home, Country Roads." The lyrics hung in the air, home. Take me home. Like a promise half kept. By the time I reached the house, the rain had turned to mist. The garage smelled of motor oil and steel, the kind of comfort you don't explain to anyone. Then the phone rang. Tyler's name glowed on the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds, then answered. His voice came through sharp shaking somewhere between rage and fear. "What the hell are you doing? Dad? Did you send a lawyer to threaten me? You've ruined everything." I leaned back against the workbench, my tone calm, maybe too calm. "No, Tyler, I didn't ruin anything. The law just stopped you from doing it. You think I'm a criminal? I was trying to build something for this family. This family doesn't need to be sold to prove its worth, I said quietly. There was silence. Then his voice broke louder. I'm your son. How could you do this to me? I let out a slow breath. Exactly because you're my son. That's why I let the law speak for me. If you want to face me, you know where to find me. Then I hung up. For the first time in my life, I was the one who ended the argument. The house went still again. Only the sound of waves outside and the faint scent of engine oil drifting in from the garage. I sat down at the table, opened the newspaper again, the headline blurring under the lamp's soft glow. No anger, no grief. Just a quiet certainty that everything was finally moving exactly as it should. Once I taught him how to hold a hammer. Now life's teaching him how to bear its weight. Later that night, Eleanor stopped by again, carrying a bowl of hot soup. She stood in the doorway, her face half lit by the porch light. You know, she said softly, the whole town's on your side. I smiled without looking up. I don't need them on my side. I just need my son to stand on the right one. She nodded, left the bowl on the table, and closed the door gently behind her. The sound of the latch echoed once. Then the ocean filled the silence, again steady, endless. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the small desk light glowing over an old photo, Rachel and Tyler, 1995. Her smile bright, her hand resting on their son's shoulder. I looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "See Rachel. He's learning. Not from me, but from the world he chose." Then I blew out the light. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the sound of the sea, deep, steady, and patient, like the memory of a father waiting for his son to step out of his own shadow. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and waits. There are wars that never reach a battlefield. Some begin and end inside your own house. And sometimes the enemy isn't a stranger. It's the son you once taught to walk. It was a gray Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the last phone call. I heard an unfamiliar engine stop outside the gate. A silver rental sedan from Portland. Tyler stepped out, shirt-wrinkled hair uncombed, dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked older, smaller, like a man who'd just learned that power and control are never the same thing. We stared at each other. No hugs, no greetings. Just the silence of two men standing on the opposite sides of a promise. I turned and walked back into the garage, the only place left where I still felt I had control. He followed. His footsteps echoed across the concrete floor, mixing with the faint hum of the sea wind whistling through the metal door. I picked up a rag, wiped my hands, and said quietly, "If you've got something to say, say it." He didn't sit. He just stood there, fists clenched, eyes red, and then the dam broke. "Dad, you never believed in me. All you ever trusted were your papers, your laws, this damn garage. You never once thought I could do something bigger. You hold on to this place like it's your life." I didn't answer. I just watched him. His voice grew louder, cracked between fury and grief. It wasn't just anger. It was a child still trying to be heard. "I wanted to prove I could do what you never dared, but you made me look like a thief. Now everyone in this town thinks I'm a criminal." He slammed his hand on the workbench. A toolbox toppled to the floor, wrenches clattering across the concrete metal on metal sharp and violent. He kicked the side of a cabinet, sending a bulb crashing from the ceiling. Glass shattered, scattering light and silence everywhere. That's when I spoke one word, low and final. Enough. Not because I was afraid of him, but because this garage, the space that held my years, my work, Rachel's memory, was the one thing I refused to let him destroy. The air went still. The wind sighed through the crack in the door. The smell of cold metal filled the room. He stood frozen, shoulders trembling, eyes burning through me. I stayed calm. Turned to the old wooden cabinet behind me, opened the drawer, and took out a weathered folder. Its edges yellowed with time. The label read, Merrick Maintenance, LLC, Living Trust, 2015. I placed it on the table and slid it toward him. Read, I said. He stared at it, then bent down. I flipped the pages until I found the one with his signature. Read this part, out loud. His voice shook as he spoke. I, Tyler Merrick, acknowledge that all assets under Merrick Maintenance, LLC may only be transferred upon the death of Dale Merrick, unless otherwise authorized by written consent of Mr. Dale Merrick. He stopped. The words hung in the air like rust. He stared at the ink his own name signed years ago after a Thanksgiving dinner when he'd barely looked up from his phone. I spoke slowly, each word heavy as forged steel. Tyler, you didn't just try to sell my house. You tried to sell your own promise. He looked up. His lips trembled. That proud light in his eyes gone. What replaced it was shame. Raw and human. He stepped back, sat down hard on a chair, hands clutching his hair. I just wanted to start over, he whispered. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought I was doing the right thing. I crossed my arms, voice calm but cold. That's your problem, son. You always think you're right until the bill comes due. I turned toward the half-open garage door. Outside, the wind carried salt and the faint scent of oil. The wooden sign above the door creaked in the breeze. Merrick Maintenance, Estriat 1988. I brushed my fingers across the letters. The garage kept this family alive, I said quietly. Without it, you wouldn't have college. You wouldn't have a future. Your mother knew that. But you only smelled the oil and called it poverty. Tyler lowered his head. Didn't speak. The waves outside hit the rocks, slow, rhythmic, like an old man's breath. I went on my voice even and low, like an idling engine. Your mother left a letter for me. She wrote, if one day he forgets where he came from, don't teach him with anger. Today, I'm keeping that promise. I'm not angry, Tyler. I'm just letting you see your own signature so you remember what happens when a man forgets his word. Silence. Only the sound of tools rolling across the floor and two sets of heavy breaths, one old, one young, trapped between guilt and blood. Then quietly Tyler lifted his head. His eyes were red. His voice broke. I was wrong. I didn't smile, didn't embrace him, didn't forgive. I simply nodded. I know. I bent down, picked up the wrenches scattered across the floor, and placed them back into the box one by one, restoring order to something larger than this garage. Tyler sat there, hands clasped, staring at the trust papers. My voice echoed softly through the still air. You can fix anything, but you can't fix trust once it's cracked. The question is, do you want to start over from the same place you broke? He didn't answer. But in his eyes, for the first time in years, there was something real. Not ambition, not pride, but remorse. I switched off the main light. Only the daylight from the open door remained, casting two shadows across the oil-stained floor, one long, one short. 2 generations. 2 definitions of honor. Sometimes a father doesn't need to win against his son. He just needs to make him stop right before he loses everything. The morning in Tillamook smelled of rain and burnt coffee. I woke earlier than usual, not out of worry, but because I knew today would be an ending. Not by a judge's hammer, but by a father's decision. Mark Johnson's law office sat on the corner by the harbor, its wooden door swollen with years of sea wind, the brass nameplate dulled to a greenish hue. I arrived first. Tyler came 10 minutes later, creased suit, no tie, face, pale eyes sunken. We said nothing as we walked inside. Only the sound of our shoes on the wooden floor, the sound of distance between two men who once shared blood and now only share silence. Inside, Mark was waiting with a young woman. She stood when we entered. "My name's Amy Carter," she said. "Mr. Johnson's legal assistant. I've been handling the Merrick Maintenance LLC file." Her voice was steady, her eyes clear, professional, but not cold. On the table lay a neat stack of documents, along with a printed report from the bank. Amy began tone even, but human. "Mr. Merrick, Mr. Tyler. After verification, the bank confirms that the seaside property remains under Merrick Maintenance LLC, fully managed and owned by Mr. Dale Merrick. The attempted sale initiated by Mr. Tyler Merrick has been voided and carries no legal effect. The real estate broker and buyer have been notified. The deposit will be refunded, but the record of the transaction will remain permanently in the bank's system." She turned a page, her eyes meeting Tyler's. "This also means that if the buyer or the bank chooses, they have grounds to pursue civil action for misrepresentation and damages." Tyler's face went white. I heard his breath catch, his hand gripped the edge of the table. Mark spoke, next voice low, words weighted like stones. "Dale, the question now is, how far do you want me to go?" The room went silent. Rain tapped softly on the window. I looked at my son, the fear in his eyes, the confusion, the boy still hiding somewhere inside the man. And for a moment I saw him again at 12 years old, holding his first wrench, asking, "Dad, how tight is tight enough?" I'd told him then, tight enough not to slip, loose enough not to break. That lesson had come back, not about bolts, but about people. I spoke slowly, my voice flat and calm. "Don't go any further, Mark. No lawsuits, no charges. We stop here." Tyler looked up, surprised. "Dad?" Really, I didn't meet his eyes. I kept my tone measured. "But Mark, I want one more thing. Draft a written statement confirming that I refuse to pursue any legal action against Tyler, and request that the bank refrain from escalating the case to criminal investigation on one condition. From today forward, Tyler Merrick is not authorized to own, manage, or interfere in any property contract or operation of Merrick Maintenance LLC until I decide otherwise." Mark stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't forgiveness. It was a boundary. Tyler's head lowered, his hands trembling slightly. His voice came out small, cracked. "Dad, I'm sorry." I nodded once, said nothing. Apology is a beginning, not redemption. When the papers were signed, Amy gathered the documents, stacking them with quiet precision. "I'll deliver these to the bank and the broker today," she said. Her tone softened, a trace of pity she couldn't quite hide. Mark looked at Tyler. "You're lucky," he said. "Not every man has a father who stops before the law starts." Tyler nodded weakly. His eyes rimmed red. I motioned toward the door. "Go on." He stood shoulders bent and walked out, each step heavier than the last, carrying the weight of youth misspent. The door closed behind him, leaving me and Mark alone in the smell of paper and damp air. Mark was quiet for a while. Then he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the table, slid it toward me. On the front, in a soft, slanted hand, was written, "Rachel Merrick." I froze. Looked at him. "What is this?" His voice dropped rough around the edges. Rachel gave it to me before she passed. She said, "Give it to Tyler when Dale believes he's hurt enough to listen." I think today might be that day. I took the envelope. It was light, but it felt heavier than any verdict. The paper had yellowed. A faint oil stain marked one corner. Rachel, the woman who had always seen further than I did. She knew this day would come, and prepared for it anyway. Mark said softly, "You can give it to him or not. But some truths, only a mother can make a son hear." I didn't answer, just nodded, stood, and left. Outside, the wind had grown stronger. The sky hung low, as if even the rain was hesitating to fall. Tyler stood by the curb, hands in his pockets, eyes lost somewhere past the bay. I watched him for a moment, then walked over. Said nothing. I placed the envelope in his hand. He looked down, then up at me. "What is this?" I said quietly. "The thing you need to hear, and not from me." Then I turned away, headed toward my truck. Behind me I heard the faint sound of paper tearing open, then silence, then the sound of someone trying not to cry. I didn't need to look back. I knew whose voice he was hearing. Rachel's, the voice we'd both stopped listening to long before she was gone. I drove along the Bay Road. The sun was setting, turning the water the color of steel. The wind carried salt, and a distant ship's horn rolled through the air. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Tyler standing alone under the rain. The letter in his hand, the storm above him, and the lesson below. Justice isn't about making someone pay. Sometimes it's knowing when to let go, so they can face the cost on their own. That night, the Tillamook Sea was restless. Waves crashed against the rocks, echoing like old memories, refusing to sleep. The porch light flickered in the wind, casting trembling patterns of gold across the wooden walls. I stood on the porch, my old army jacket draped over my shoulders. The coffee in my hand had gone cold, but I didn't put it down. The air smelled of salt oil and dried lavender, the scent that only existed in this house, the one Rachel had chosen. Inside, Tyler sat alone at the kitchen table. In front of him lay a pale yellow envelope, its corners bent, its surface stained by time. Rachel's handwriting curved across the front. "For you, when you've forgotten what truly matters." I didn't speak, just watched from the porch through the half-open window. 10 steps separated us, 10 short steps, and more than 10 years of silence. There are things only the dead can make the living hear. Not because they're wiser, but because we finally go quiet, when there's no one left to answer. Tyler opened the envelope. The sound of paper sliding against paper was small, but sharp enough to fill the quiet room. He unfolded the letter. Rachel's slanted handwriting had faded to a soft blue, but each line still cut deep. "My son, if you're reading this, it means you've reached for something that was never yours. I'm not writing to blame you. I just want you to understand why I chose a man like your father. He wasn't rich. He wasn't easy to live with. But he kept his word. He worked with his hands, believing that anything built from honest labor lasts longer than anything bought with money. I loved him for that. And I feared that one day you'd forget when the world outside started calling your name. If you're reading this now, it means you've lost something your father spent his whole life trying to protect. He's not perfect, but he's never broken his word. Try to keep yours at least once in your life. Tyler lowered the letter. The lamp above him cast a soft light on his face, tired, hollow, but stripped of arrogance. He ran his hand across the edge of the table, the same wooden table where Rachel used to write, to cook, to arrange her flowers. The house was silent. Only the waves my heart beat, and the long sigh of a man realizing what he'd truly lost. After a while, Tyler stepped onto the porch. He looked older, years older than he had that morning. His shirt wrinkled, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, his voice lower, steadier. Dad. He paused, staring out at the dark sea. I've got nothing left in Portland. Brooke's gone. My friends don't pick up anymore. Can I stay here a while? The wind picked up, carrying salt into the air, cool against my face. I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted toward the garage, its light still burning, faithful, unchanging. That garage had never betrayed me. Machines make sense, they follow rules. Metal oil time. If a part fails, you remove it clean, it replace it. People aren't built that way. They break from the inside, and there are no spare parts. I turned back to him. The garage still needs a cleaner, I said. An apprentice. No big salary, no fancy title, just grease noise and work. He looked at me, eyes uncertain. If you're willing to start from zero, I added, then stay. He bowed his head. Didn't argue. Didn't ask for forgiveness. After a long silence, he nodded, slow, certain. I'll do it. I nodded back. No embrace, no pat on the shoulder, no sentimental music. At my age, you learn that love doesn't need a gesture. It's enough to show up and start again in the morning. The next dawn was silver and quiet. Dew clung to the garage roof, tiny drops glinting like frost. I opened the steel cabinet and pulled out a pair of leather gloves, brand new, still smelling faintly of oil and time. I handed them to Tyler. He frowned. These are mine. I smiled. I bought them when you were 12. First time you walked into the shop with me. You said you wanted gloves like a grown man. He looked at them, then smiled a small, honest smile, the kind that didn't need words. He put them on. They fit. I turned on the old radio, a country song half finished from the day before. We both leaned over the same old bus engine. Hands moving in rhythm oil, dripping to the floor, light bouncing off bolts and chrome. People think revenge is about making someone kneel, but sometimes true justice is making them stand, face their own shadow, and choose to rebuild instead of run. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching Tyler clean his hands, fold the rag, and place it neatly back where it belonged. A small thing, but to me the first sign of change. I remembered Rachel's words, keep your word at least once in your life. And I knew today he'd started to. Before sunset, I walked down to the beach. The cold sand stung my bare feet. The wind smelled of salt and rain. I carried Rachel's letter in my jacket pocket. Waves rolled in, washing away my footprints, leaving behind something else, a quiet I hadn't felt in years. I whispered to the wind. Can you hear me, Rachel? He's staying. Morning came again. Sunlight spilled into the garage, dust glittering in the air like threads of silver. Tyler lay under a bus chassis, and I passed him a wrench. 2 pairs of gloves, 2 hands, 2 steady breaths. No words, no music, just work. A man can lose his house, his money, his name, but if he can still bow his head and start again, he hasn't lost his honor. A year, it sounds short, but in that time a man can lose himself or find his way back. I was still in Tillamook, still the same garage, still the same smell of oil salt in the air and the low hum of engines beneath the morning fog. The only difference was I wasn't alone anymore. Every morning at 5, my old pickup coughed to life. Tyler always woke before the alarm. Dust on his jacket hair, a mess, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He'd climb into the passenger seat, say nothing. We'd drive along the fog-draped coastal road headlights, slicing through mist fields glittering with dew. He once called this drive boring. Now he watches the sea each morning as if trying to understand the thing he'd once traded away. The county garage hadn't changed gray concrete walls, buzzing neon lights, morning news on the radio. But this time Tyler wasn't a visitor. He was an apprentice. At first, the others looked at him with curiosity and judgment. Everyone had heard the story. The son who tried to sell his father's house. The whispers followed him like exhaust smoke. Is he really working here? He used to run a startup in Portland. Tyler heard them all. Never answered. He just worked. He wiped grease, replaced brakes, learned to listen to the sound of engines, not as machines, but as living things that speak when they're braking. One morning I asked, "What do you hear in that sound?" He tilted his head, listened. "There's a rhythm off in the valve," he said quietly, like someone trying to hide a flaw by running faster. I looked at him, nodded. "You're finally listening with your ears, not your pride." Time moved. The stares faded. People started greeting him by name. He wasn't Dale's boy anymore. He was Tyler, the guy who handled the morning shift, who checked every brake line twice. Eleanor Reeves still stopped by each week bringing coffee and warm waffles. She'd walk in and laugh. So the two stubborn heads finally learned to bend together. I'd smile. Tyler would shrug, that quiet smile he'd picked up lately. But I saw it in his eyes, the change. Less arrogance, more calm, and for the first time in years, something close to peace. Summer came, and the garage turned into a furnace. The air smelled of hot iron and salt. Sweat and oil mixed into the same rhythm. Tyler never complained. He worked beside me, ate cold sandwiches, drank water from the tap, as if he'd never known restaurants or boardrooms. One afternoon, I saw him sitting at the wooden desk. The old laptop opened the light from the screen washing over his face. I walked over. An email glowed on the screen from Brooke. He didn't hide it. He read quietly, then turned the laptop so I could see. Brooke wrote about Los Angeles, how she'd tried to invest with an old friend, lost everything, and was now working in a coffee shop to survive. "I know I was wrong," she wrote. "Not because of the money, but because I never understood what it meant for something to last. If I could see you once more, I'd only want to say that, then I'd go." I read it. Closed the laptop, said slowly, "That's your choice, son. Just remember, forgiving someone doesn't mean giving them another chance to break you." He nodded. Didn't speak. A week later, he deleted the email. No reply. No anger. And I didn't ask why. Because sometimes maturity doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in silence. I never taught him forgiveness. I only taught him how not to let anger turn him into someone else. Autumn came painting Tillamook in red and gold. Maple leaves covered the road to the garage. We swept them together, repainted the doors, replaced the old sign. One morning, Mark Johnson and Amy Carter arrived carrying a stack of papers. Amy smiled. "I've got an idea if you'll allow it, Mr. Merrick. This garage could become a place for local kids to learn. Fix bikes, repair engines, understand the value of real work. We could call it the Rachel Merrick Youth Program." The name hit me like a breath I hadn't taken in years. Mark looked at me. "Dale," he said quietly, "it's time her name lived again. Not on a grave, but where she believed in life the most." I nodded. "Do it." By mid-autumn, a new wooden sign hung above the door, Merrick Garage and Rachel Merrick Youth Program. White letters carved by hand standing bright against the gray. On opening day, 8 kids showed up, one with a broken bike, another with a rusty lawnmower. I stood by the door. Let Tyler take the lead. He wore his work shirt, hands stained with grease. Voice steady. "This isn't a classroom," he said. "It's a place where you're allowed to mess up as long as you learn how to fix it." The kids laughed, voices bouncing off the walls. "Mr. Merrick. Mr. Merrick, help us with this one." I froze for a moment. Mr. Merrick. For the first time, that name didn't belong only to me. Tyler looked up, met my eyes, and nodded. In that nod, I saw what Rachel always believed, that justice isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's the chance to rebuild. That evening, the garage filled with laughter and the smell of gasoline and waffles, Eleanor's latest batch. Amy took photos. Mark stood beside me and said quietly, "You know, Dale, this might be the first revenge story that ends in peace." I smiled faintly. "It's not revenge, Mark. It's repair." Justice doesn't always live in a courtroom. Sometimes it's in the sound of an engine roaring back to life after years of silence, in the oil-stained hands of a man who once failed, and in the quiet pride of a father who finally learned how to let go. 2025. Tillamook still looks the same, a small town between the evergreens and the ocean wind. But for me, everything has changed. People say time heals all wounds. I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to look at the scar without shaking. The morning mist rolls through the garage doors, curling like smoke around the rows of yellow school buses. Their mirrors gleam faintly in the gray light. I walk the line with my clipboard in hand, checking brakes, oil wipers, the kind of small, steady things that keep the world moving. At the far end, Tyler is kneeling beside a 12-year-old boy. The kid's tongue pokes out the corner of his mouth as he tightens the last bolt on an old engine. Sweat beads on his forehead. But the smile that breaks across his face, it's bright, honest, and full of pride. Tyler pats his shoulder. "Good job," he says. "Remember, it doesn't have to be strong. It just has to be right." The same words I once said to him. I stand there watching, feeling the strange weight of a circle closing. I used to believe justice meant seeing the guilty pay. Now I understand real justice is when they learn not to make the same mistake twice. At noon, the kids spill out to the porch, their laughter carried by the sea breeze. Eleanor Reeves, our guardian angel, with flour on her hands, brings coffee and warm apple bread. She waves off my thanks. "Don't mention it, Dale. Feeding stubborn men is a community service." I sit at my usual corner, same wooden chair, same old table. From the drawer, I pull out a small wooden box. Inside Rachel's letter. The paper is soft yellowed with time. Her handwriting leans slightly right, steady, gentle, just like her. I've read it more times than I can count. But today feels different. No sting, no ache, no ghosts. Only peace. I unfold the letter slowly. If you're reading this, it means you've reached for something that wasn't yours. I'm not blaming you. I just want you to understand why I chose a man like your father. He wasn't rich. He wasn't easy. But he kept his word. He worked with his hands because he believed what's built by labor lasts longer than what's bought by money. Try to keep your word at least once in your life. I fold it back carefully and rest my hand on the box. Through the open door, I can see the ocean gray, calm, endless. And in its rhythm, I hear everything again. That morning phone call. The forged signature. Brooke's voice through static. Nights when Tyler's name flashed on my phone at 2 a.m. The confrontation in the garage. The lawyer's office. Rachel's words. And mornings spent under the same bus, father and son, side by side, working without a word. I wasn't perfect either. I stayed quiet too long. I let my son believe that money was the only thing worth fighting for. And in that silence, I helped create the man I later had to learn to forgive. By late afternoon, the sunlight slants low, turning the concrete floor into a sheet of gold. It glints off the new sign above the door, Merrick Garage and Rachel. Merrick Youth Program. The kids pack up their voices, echoing through the garage, bouncing off the walls like bright birds. Tyler locks up. I sit on the front steps, watching the sun sink into the sea, a copper horizon melting into waves. Tyler, come here. He walks over, wiping his hands on a grease rag, and sits beside me. I reach into my pocket, pull out the garage key, the same one I've carried for 30 years. The metal is worn smooth, paint chipped, but still catches the light. I place it in his hand. One day I say, when I'm not strong enough to crawl under these buses anymore, this place will be yours. Not because you're my son, but because you've learned how to keep it. He grips the key. His eyes shine wet but steady. I don't deserve any of this, he says softly. I look out at the waves. No one deserves the people who love them, Tyler. We just try to live close enough to be worthy. We sit quietly. The sound of the ocean. The wind in the pines. The soft rattle of keys between our palms. They blend together into a kind of music, the song of two men finally learning to forgive the past. I look at Tyler again. He's not the man who once stood in a Portland office suit, pressed voice loud, talking about profit margins and growth strategies. He's just a man now, a worker, a son who's learned when to speak, when to bow his head, and when to simply keep building. I smile, not pride, just peace. You can't erase the past, but if you're brave enough to live differently, the past can't kill you twice. Eleanor's voice carries from the gate. Dinner's ready, you two stubborn men. Tyler and I both laugh for the first time without bitterness. It's real. Like the scene finally taking a deep breath. The sunset burns red across the horizon. Camera rises slowly. The porch fades into view. The ocean glows bronze. The house old wood warmed by the last light of day. From above, the garage stands, bright doors open, golden lamps spilling light into the dusk. Children's laughter drifts up into the sky. Engines hum like a heartbeat. The sign, Rachel Merrick Youth Program, shines softly in the gathering dark. Inside, Tyler guides a boy's hand on a wrench. I stand beside him, arms folded, watching not as a teacher, but as a witness. If anyone asks, I'll tell them my son once tried to sell my house. But what he really sold was the man he used to be. I turn toward the sea nod once, a small salute to someone I can't see, but still feel everywhere. Rachel's smile flickers in my mind, gentle, like a wave touching shore. If your child sold your home behind your back, could you forgive them? Tell me your story. I read every word. Justice isn't an ending. It's the quiet moment when we learn how to begin again with grace. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever had to choose between justice and forgiveness, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what forgiveness means to you. Don't forget to like this video if you believe that redemption is stronger than revenge. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories where family pride and justice meet the truth. Because sometimes the quietest voices tell the loudest stories.